Yeah, we're doing all of our empathy movement building projects. So that's all. Just had a meeting, this morning. We talk about the Empathy Summit and kind of all the projects people are working on. So got a lot of different balls in the air. There is that the conference that I was mentioning that's on let me when
Is it the
is that?
24th, I want
The
to say?
24th, yeah, and it was uh, if you're wanting to attend, I had initially I was going to attend in person. They had a registration fee, and then since we're not attending there, that the registration for just the online is cheaper, and they said, "Oh, we can refund your money." I said, "No, I can just maybe invite some people." And so if you want to come, it would be free
Oh, okay.
to
And what is is it an all day event on?
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
it's let me events empathy summit and May. Oh, there it is. So here I'm gonna put the schedule into the chat.
okay.
Um, so the main thing is we need help at 7 o'clock Pacific time to facilitate an empathy circle.
Yeah, I can definitely be there for that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so you can drop in and out, but let me see if I can find the Google Doc for it. Yeah, so I don't know if you saw it. It's in the chat. Oh, I didn't return, so you can download it.
Oh,
And then
thank you.
here's sort of a planning page, so I can put you down as one of the. Oh, that's the wrong page. That was our other planning page. Summit. Volunteers. Multiple pages here. So that was our planning page. I think that the last one, and no, that's not even it, too. I got too many documents. But anyway, those are related to the conference. But let's see.
Okay, so it looks like you speak in the morning at 8:30.
That's like a keynote. Got half an hour, which I'm going to talk about, the definition project. So, uh, and then at 7 o'clock, we do the empathy circle, and we have an hour and a half for doing that with the attendees. And we'll have breakout rooms, and so we need facilitators for
Okay.
those.
How many total attendees are you expecting?
They had 100 last time. They had the room full. She thought it would be less because the time is going to be kind of California to Australia time. They're in Australia. So there's going to be a
Oh,
lot less people. She thought maybe
right.
40 or so.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, well, definitely put me down as one of
hmm
the facilitators, and I
Okay.
will make sure that I can come to your keynote. That's
hmm
9:30 my time. I'm going to put that in. That, oh my gosh, I'm just looking at that week and it's an insane week. I'll just walk you through it briefly. There's another empathy conference. I can't remember who's putting this on, but it's online. It's Monday and Wednesday.
I think
From
Daryl, what is it?
Is
Daryl
Daryl putting that one
Cameron?
on?
Cameron has one. Then there's another
Well,
one.
I went to that one. That was a couple of weeks
Oh,
ago.
okay.
And then I'm presenting in Daryl's lab on
hmm
Tuesday,
This Tuesday?
the 20th. And then my son is graduating from sixth grade on Wednesday.
Mm.
And we have like 1,000 meetings for that sports camp. My kids get out of school on Friday. So
Yeah, you
it's,
had that camp that you were talking about
yeah. And
planning.
so then that camp happens the week after. So it's all sorts of crazy right now. And just lots of, when everybody is pushed past their limit, everybody gets testy.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's what we're dealing with right now. And we're all trying really hard to be kind to each other and have empathy. But there's just, when you are tired, you're meeting until 10 p.m. about nitpicky details on stuff, people start to lose their minds. Okay, so this most recent thing you sent me is the one I should be looking at.
Um,
It's the
no, there's I don't know. It looks like I have three. Let me well, let's see, Empathy Summit. Those are kind of planning or other planning pages. The Empathy Summit, May. I think this is their link. So from here you can see there, and I'll send you the URL once I get it.
okay. So this is co-presented by your organization and this organization
Hmm. Yeah.
in Australia, right?
Hmm. And
Okay.
they last year they did. They've been working with universities. So last year they worked with the university in Prague, and it was actually held in Prague.
Hmm.
This year they were going to do it at UC Santa Cruz, here
Yeah.
in Santa Cruz, and then the university actually canceled because all the Trump stuff going on with all the universities. So they actually had all
Oh,
their schedules and everything, hotels, flights, everything booked, and then they said, no, we can't hold it because we don't know what's happening. So you can just see
wow,
that.
that's crazy.
Yeah, because they had people coming from Australia and other places, and so you can see what kind of effects all this stuff is having.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so unfortunate. As much fun as it is to still hear presentations online, there's nothing about it that's the same as being in person.
Yeah.
Because you don't just chat with each other and share ideas the way you would if you were in person. So that's so unfortunate.
Yeah. So anyway, it'll be online this year. Who knows what next year? But it's really nice that they at Prague, Jana and Ruth had presented a fishbowl empathy circle, and everybody liked it so much that they wanted to kind of go deeper and actually hold one with attendees. So
Yeah,
that's
that's
nice.
great.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to talk through your presentation at all?
Okay, well, I did sort of go over it last time. The point where I'm at now is I've been starting to tackle the affective cognitive uh, empathic concern model. So, the I've presented the presentation twice, and I want to add now at least that model and how it compares to the holistic empathy, model and to the empathy circle. So I can maybe just give you a quick review here, what I've been kind of working on, kind of get your take on it.
Yeah,
And
I'd love to see it.
yeah, so if we go to defining empathy uh, site, got the to do, the and the effective. So it's like just a little overview of the issues related. So, and it's all kind of still rough because I've been going a lot of different directions with it, but kind of addressing, and I can't put it all into the presentation, but this is kind of for the larger, uh, just addressing the larger model because I mean it's like the dominant model. And I think we're both kind of like that model doesn't really work very well.
Yeah.
It has too many inconsistencies and even the terminology. So even starting from the inaccurate dualistic mindset, saying,
Where it's two separate things. Is that what you're saying?
yeah,
Yeah.
and so the whole model is kind of based on that. So I think the model is overly academic. I mean, who wants to hear about affective and cognitive empathy kind of in regular circles? I think
Mhm.
plus it's inaccurate. inconsistent. Even within that model, they're defining it differently. So there's not like even a consensus about what affective and cognitive empathy model is. And I
Yeah,
hear
that's
it.
definitely consistent with what I've been seeing. Like within affective, sometimes they're talking about emotion contagion, emotional understanding, or emotional awareness. And then cognitive, they're talking about perspective taking or what's the other thing? They sometimes are,
Imaginative or just
yeah,
understanding.
yeah.
It's
So understanding, and then I think even some of them talk about understanding the emotion. So
hmm
that overlaps with the affective. So it's very
yeah.
confusing.
Yeah, and can you understand an emotion without having a visceral sense of the emotion as you speak about it? If, you know what I mean? It's like if you say fear, you know, it raises a sense of what fear feels like in your consciousness because those neurons are wired together. It's kind of like George Lakoff, he talks about don't think of an elephant. You can't not think of an elephant
Mhm.
in that sense. So, I mean, it's a little overlap there, but just that there's subtle feelings underneath. And so, anyway, it's all the whole dualistic mindset. I don't. Did you get see that Dan Sahabi? Uh,
Gosh,
the
I had it up for a couple of weeks,
mhm,
planning on getting to it just because
okay.
there's been all this other stuff, and then I closed it on accident.
Okay.
Let me see if I can find it in my Google Drive. I listened to some of it, but I didn't do the whole thing.
It's just that I think he's coming from the phenomenologist viewpoint, and I think
Yeah,
the
I need to.
phenomenologists aren't doing the dualistic mindset. So they're the ones I think that we're probably more in tuned with. And
Yeah, I agree.
Rogers was, as I understood, a phenomenologist too. So they don't, you know, put it into that dualistic sort of mindset. I mean, it totally dominates here in the United States. As I understand, it's in the Anglo-Saxon world. It's kind of big, but not the Europeans are a bit more towards phenomenology.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also even that is losing support because I worked with Allison, can't remember her last name, but she's at Green Bay, Wisconsin. She has a lab there, and we were talking about this topic, and she says even among the academic community, it's starting to lose support, this
Hmm.
dualistic view. And when I we talked to Marco Iacoboni, you know, he's the uh, neuroscientist out of UCLA. He did a book called Mirroring People, and he
Oh,
even
I'm not
said
familiar
he
with
said, you
him.
know, affect and feeling and thinking is just two sides of the same coin. You know,
Huh.
so this I think that so there's a lot of
What's his last name again?
Iacoboni. Um, Culture of empathy. Marco,
Okay, there we go.
Marco.
Mirroring people. Yeah, I haven't even heard of that book.
Yeah, he's like, you know, really top researcher.
Oh, definitely need to look at his research.
But here's a link. You know, I did a couple interviews with him. He's just
Oh, okay.
very accessible. So he was one of the people that brought in, you know, mirror neurons at work
Okay,
locally, you
so I'm
know.
sure I've read some of his stuff, just didn't
Mhm.
realize who it was I was reading.
Okay, so that's just some broad, and if you go to the home page here, I've kind of gone into more depth. I have to, you know, is my in an introduction, what makes the holistic empathy model unique, you know, moves from individualistic, from abstract to personal, eliminates reason feeling dichotomy, uh, creates an integrative and inclusive approach. So I think it's more inclusive, the model, and it's practical and usable. So that's anyway on the homepage of defining empathy. Been kind of working on that. And then going back to the model. So, you know, I'm starting to write down what are some of the specific problems with affective empathy model, kind of going a little bit deeper and with the cognitive empathy. But I've been going into just working on the cognitive. So there's a whole page just on cognitive. And I've been going through all the like chat, all the AI.
Hmm.
and doing search. So I go through and doing a search, list 10 ways cognitive empathy is defined, and then just been doing searches. So I've gone through all these chat engines to see how, just to see how they address the question. So there's Chat GPT, Gemini, Meta. And so that's kind of what I'm working on right now, kind
This
of
is great.
doing a systematic review. And then and then I've been kind of going through seeing how uh, it reviews this topic. And I'll do that for effective empathy too. I just doing these quotes. So I say, give me 50 quotes on the definition of cognitive empathy. The words cognitive empathy should be in the quote. The output format should be author, name, last first. This should be on a separate line and bold. Quote, source. Sort the list alphabetically by author, last name, bold the words cognitive empathy. So I'm trying to get a like this. This was the first version 50. I'm going to do like 100. So we have like a total list of all these academics and how they
Yeah,
kind of
this is so
defined it.
cool. I love this.
And so I'll do that for cognitive. So I kind of do it kind of systematically. So we have, and then it's sorting. If you go through these lists, it's there's understanding is like a big word, like it's understanding others. It's imagining, which I think could map into the imaginative empathy.
Hmm.
Understanding is just the basic empathy. We just sense into the other person, kind of the wholeness of their being, and as you sense into, you create a sense of understanding the relationships of in a map, sort of a mental map of what that other person is. There's identification, and knowing mental. So these are just a few of the headings I still have to kind of slog through. It's very tedious. It's
Yeah,
it's
it's
almost like
so awesome.
it's like a Gordian knot of just incoherency, if you ask me, at one level, and
Yeah.
it's dry and that's one thing I loved about Carl Rogers for me at least, it's easy reading. It makes sense. His work is just very accessible and it's not so dry and academic, seems to me.
That's been my experience as well. I just don't see the value in writing in a way that nobody wants to read it. Like, who are you benefiting with that?
Yeah. And I don't know if I can do any better, but I try. I'll try. And yeah, so anyway, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm still, kind of throwing a lot in here. It's still kind of in the middle of the sausage making. And I just got to get something minimal for the presentation, just an idea or two about cognitive and effective empathy.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about that is you're probably going to end up spending like 20 hours on this part of it and have 5 minutes to talk about it, right?
Yeah, just to be sure that I know what I'm talking about and it's
Yeah.
well grounded, and I can back up everything.
Yeah. That's amazing how much you're doing on that.
Yeah, it's my main project, currently. So, and it is the affective cognitive model is the most, challenging because it's the most dominant model out there. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of the where I'm at. So I'm not quite sure how we can address that. It's kind of having a how to lay out a systematic, easy to understand mapping that model onto holistic empathy.
Right. And do you see any overlaps, or do you think that it should just be scrapped? This model should be scrapped in favor of the holistic approach.
Well, that's it. So with holistic empathy, when I'm in an empathy circle listening, and I'm listening to you, I'm it seems like it's a holistic listening, right? I'm listening to any thought you have, any feeling you have, just whatever is sort of arising kind of in the wholeness of who you are. I'm trying to listen and reflect that. So I think it's sort of how to map that And because some of them are saying, well, it's understanding through understanding the feelings and thoughts of others. Some would say it's just so so it. I mean, I think that just the listening to someone for the wholeness of who they are, deeply listening, being present, kind of captures a lot of it.
Hmm.
And then there are some this that direct empathy with imaginative empathy and separating those. I think so. I'm kind of looking at where are they defining uh, cognitive empathy is imagination, and say, well, imagination, it fits in the imaginative empathy bucket because it is a different phenomenon, I think, than just being present, listening to someone, for the sensing into their experience. So I think it's taking all of this and putting it into those two buckets.
Could you describe what you mean by that a little bit more to me, like that they're two separate phenomena? Because the way that I think about it, when you're listening and sensing into somebody, the way that I experience it when I'm fully present with them, I find myself imagining what their life was like
hmm
before our encounter, right? So
Yeah.
what led them to believe the way they do, to feel the way they do, to react the way they do. So I see them as intertwined. But yeah, if
Yeah,
you
they're
could.
intertwined too. It's not a 100. You can't separate them. 100. When you're listening, you're going to be perhaps using some imagination at times, right? So, but I do think it's it's another level of the phenomenon in the sense that with the role taking, like we can clearly, if we're doing an empathy circle like the one we do with the family in conflict, that and you're imagining yourself being that person in conflict, it's very different, that imagination, than listening directly to someone and
Mhm.
hearing them and reflecting and sensing, sort of a direct sensing into who they are. And even while you're doing that direct sensing, you might have judgment. You might have like, oh, I want to get out of here, or all these other things that are in the back of your mind, but you're
Mhm.
still staying present with that person. And you may have some imagination too, but you still. So it's all kind of mixed. It seems like it's all sort of mixed in together, but you
Yeah,
still
like the
bring that empathic presence in is kind of like the main sort of felt the main experience that you have. So I do think that there is a separation. You can make that separation with imagination, though.
Yeah. And would you say that that overlaps with people who are actors? I know you've
Yeah.
used the
hmm
Meryl Streep example for imaginative empathy. I just wonder how often in the real world do we put ourselves in role playing situations, right? It's not very, I mean, yes, it happens, like especially in like training situations where we're learning how we would respond in a scenario. So like in a business training or
Medical, they do those.
yeah,
Mhm.
they do lots of role plays like how would I respond to the patient if they brought this kind of concern to me. So yeah, that's common, but I don't think it's anywhere near as common as the kind of imaginative empathy where I'm imagining you when you were younger or something like that, right?
But if
So
if I'm saying, oh, when I was younger, I had this experience, you could imagine that, or you could just say, well, being totally present, I hear you really have these experience when you were younger. So it does seem like I mean, it does seem like two different. I mean, you could even say it's a different phenomenon in terms of, when babies are born, they when baby cries, the others cry because they sort of have that feeling comes into into their being, and then they sort of take it on. So they're very sensitive to taking on sort of emotional contagion.
mhm,
And it's not until you're um, what is it, a year and a half, or I think or 2 years, that they do that Sally Ann test. Are you familiar with the Sally Ann
yeah.
test? So at that point, there's a point where they can't imagine themselves in the situation of the other person to imagine what they're seeing, how they're seeing the world. So there
There's
is
really
this,
no separation
yeah.
between them and others.
So it does seem like there is a cognitive, not a cognitive, a developmental level of empathy that happens, and we, like in the empathy circle, we very rarely do we do the imaginative empathy, but we have done it, and I don't talk about it much, but I do see it as a phenomenon that can
Mhm.
be, and I think it does help with. And a lot of times I see the definitions out there are imagine. You imagine Obama empathy was imagining yourself in someone's situation, and it can be right, it can be wrong too. It's there's higher chance of it being wrong because you're not directly there. You're not getting that active listening feedback, for example, is trying to create a greater accuracy. So
Mhm.
I don't know. I know that we had who was it, Veronica? No, Valerie. Can't remember. She was in here. She talked about imaginative empathy. You know, she thought for her all empathy is imaginative, but yeah, I don't know. How do you?
Yeah, I do see what you're saying, where it seems like it's two separate things, where if you're imagining, it's kind of like that Einfühlung, where you're imbuing the other person with your version of their reality, right? So you think, because I mean, because every single one of us has a different lens through which we see the world. And so it's categorically going to be different from the way they're actually experiencing it. And so when we're imagining, we're doing our best, but it is always going to be filtered through that lens, right? And so we're 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 thinking this is what I think they would feel during that. And so that's where the imaginative empathy is inaccurate.
Can
Um,
be, yeah.
yeah, it can be very inaccurate, unfortunately, at times. It's I think it's better than not trying, because I see that as a first step, where if you, and I think I've mentioned this before, when we're talking with children, the best way to that I have found so far, and I'm not to say that I'm an expert in this area, but I have found it to be effective to help children to see the other person's perspective by asking them, how would you feel if that happened to you? Right? So it's like it seems like that's one of the developmental stages of, I'm still very self-focused, and I can imagine what I might feel like if I were in that person's shoes. But it's still very self-focused, right? And you're
Yeah,
trying to get to that next level, but you're not actually opening up truly empathically by listening to them.
right. Uh-huh.
And I think that along with the Kohlberg's moral development stages, he talks about how there's this higher level of moral development that most of us never reach, where we get to the point that we understand fairness and we understand authority, and we need to follow the rules for the greater good. But there is kind of this transcendent form of morality where we see the reason for the rules, the reason for the authority, and we can understand that sometimes those rules need to be bent. And so it's like it's a higher level of morality. So
Hmm.
bringing in that example just to say that I think that there is this higher form of empathy that most of us never get to. And that is the form of empathy that's holistic, where
Hmm.
you're able to just set aside yourself for a little while and fully let them talk until they feel heard. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with that one because you developed the empathy circle. But I just think it's very uncommon for people to engage in that kind of empathy, even though they think they're empathizing, right? So
Hmm.
it is still empathy, but I think it's developmentally not quite there. And you know what? I really should have written a paper about this. And maybe I will next semester, like the developmental stages of empathy. I think I'm going to do that in the fall.
There are some out there. I think the
Yeah, I need to read them and incorporate them into my understanding.
Well, with the holistic empathy, that would be seeing the whole, like how like all the fact, all the how people are empathizing with each other. So it's like a sensitivity to that and being supportive of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's that holistic. The other is with the children. Um, you can ask the child, like, what do you think the other person was feeling, or and I've done my nephews and nieces before, is I listen to them, right? I say, well, what was up for you when this happened? And I empathically listen to them. And then I bring them into not like what, don't imagine what the other person is, going through, is actually listen to them. And the other person, the other child actually shares what's going on for them, and then they reflect back their understanding. You get them into basically an empathy circle
Hmm.
with each other, so that they're not using the imag they're not imagining, they're actually hearing from the other person what their experience was, which is going to be closer to the real experience. uh,
I think that's really neat. So it doesn't have to be this framework that is rigid. You can take it into interactions even with children,
mhm.
and you're using the framework as your launching point, right? But you're recognizing that not everybody wants to sit down for an hour and a half long empathy circle, and take turns like that. But you can still use what you've learned from the circle to inform those kinds of
Yeah, the
interactions.
dynamic. There's an underlying dynamic there, and I've done it with, like, I have at the time 5-year-old niece, 6-year-old nephew, and they always get in a fight with each other. And one time they were in a fight. I sat down with my nephew and niece. They were both there. I listened to him, reflected back, listened to her, reflected back, did that a couple times to model it. Then I asked them to do it with each other, and they actually were able to sort of understand and come out with some understanding, come to an agreement. And then when we were done, it was really kind of cute. My niece, who's always losing the fights because she's weaker, right, younger and weaker, she said, I like empathy circles, let's do it again.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
that makes me want to do it with my kids.
hmm
I haven't yet. I mean, I've been teaching them how to empathize,
hmm
but I haven't implemented that model. How long did that actually take for them to understand the value of it?
I don't know, it was about a 20-minute event.
That's great.
So
Are these the
yeah,
kids of your
my
toxic
brother,
sister-in-law?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, so did
yeah.
she know this was happening and did she hate it or
No, it was like, then another time what happened is my other nephew, who's a bit older, and the same niece, Annie and Teddy. This was the other one was Gilbert. So they got into an issue where they had made popsicles, out of ice cubes, and then Annie had eaten Teddy's popsicle. And he was really upset, and he ran to his bed and he laid in his bed, with his arms crossed, and he wasn't going to talk to anyone, you know. And my brother, toxic brother and sister-in-law, their thing is just, you're wrong, you get punished or whatever, right? It's like it's sort of a punishment. And she said, okay, well, show me how you handle it. So I went over there. He's in bed, and I said, oh, do you want to tell me what happened? And he he just shook his head, like, I'm not going to even talk. It's okay. What I'm hearing is you just don't want to talk about it. You're just feeling upset. Is that right?
Hmm.
And then so I just kind of, and he just was really quiet. And I kind of reflected a few times, trying to, but his signals, emotional signals were only shaking his head or nothing. And I just reflected back. So you don't want to talk about it and you're feeling upset. And then Annie came over, and so she was there, and I said, well, what's going on with you? And then I reflected back, oh, well, I ate his popsicle, and I'm sorry about it, or something like that. and I reflected back and, tried to get him to speak, but he would still be really quiet. And then I can't remember exactly how it unfolded, but Annie said, "Well," I said, "Well, what can we do?" And I said, "Well, I can make him a new popsicle." And then he brightened up, and then they both jumped up and went
And
and
that
made a
was that.
popsicle, and that was that. And there was no judging anyone or saying you're bad, don't you
Yeah.
do this. It was, empathically getting them to dialogue with each other, and I acted as facilitator because he wouldn't even dialogue, but I did reflect back what he was saying non-verbally, and then yeah.
Yeah, and I'm having all of these ideas about what was happening inside of his mind just from the emotional intelligence research on that. And he's not able to access his prefrontal cortex in the moment when he's just hijacked. His amygdala is trying to protect him from this
Hmm.
threat, right? And so he shuts down, and that looks like that's his. So he's maybe fight or flight or freeze. Maybe he's the freeze version, right? And he can't access that prefrontal cortex until he is able to put words to it, right? And
And
so
I'm helping put the
and you're
words to it.
helping, right? You're modeling for him what the words are. And so it's actually helping him make those connections in his brain again. And so it seems like that's eventually why he was able to actually come out of it, because he was frozen, and you helped him by empathizing with him. You gave him the words to make sense of what was happening inside of his brain.
And they got to dialogue about it too. They got to hear each other out. And then Annie actually came up with a solution of what she could do. And I was just so surprised how he went from this total, blocked to they were best friends again.
That's amazing.
It was so funny. I just
Yeah, that's
how
crazy.
kids can make that shift so quickly is
Oh,
pretty
it is
amazing.
amazing. And how quickly they can go from being best friends to hating each other.
Yeah, it goes the other way
It's,
too.
but they are resilient. So that's good to know that they don't last forever in those states.
And having these tools, because I haven't seen them for a while because I'm not visiting over there, but it used to be that they get into fights all the time because my brother's quite authoritarian, and the sister-in-law is bipolar, has just all kinds of kind of those kind of bipolar kind of issues, very sort of domineering and stuff. And so they have a whole different way. They kind of let them do whatever they want until they hit a point where they tell them, they use kind of heaviness or, authority to just shut them up or make them do what they want. But when
That
I
is
was there,
so
it was
hard.
like I say, well, what do we do? We got a conflict. What do we do? And they say, oh, we have an empathy circle. So I was starting to train them, but you have to do it consistently to keep it going, I think.
Yeah, that's so tricky because then they'll just get back into the mode of how things are in their home.
Yeah.
And that becomes more of the habitual way of dealing with situations. So it is
Yeah.
unfortunate that you can't have more of an influence there.
Yeah, that's the one thing I'm sad about. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so tricky. Even in my own family, my husband's much more authoritarian than I am. And he's even said I spend too much time empathizing. And sometimes you just need to lay down the law. But I think that it's a tricky balance because kids do also need to have structure and rules, right? And so if you get too deep into the mode of just following whatever they want and wherever their thoughts are leading them and their moral standards or whatever, um, I wonder how much it can become where we're not actually guiding them. But if we're empathizing effectively, then we're helping them to discover those higher levels of moral reasoning.
Yeah, but the
Um,
empathy circle is very structured and it is a boundary. The whole point is like it's using structure to support empathy though. So it's getting, the family members to use empathic listening, turn taking, reflection, to work through different issues. So it totally puts in boundaries, and
yeah,
that's
I
the
love
whole
that.
point of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just thinking in general of without the empathy circle, if your focus is just empathize, and I know that we've talked about this before, then
Hmm.
you're only seeing where they are right now, and you're kind of just allowing that to guide everything
Right. You're just
you're doing.
following along with them and not,
Yeah,
you're doing the listening and they're not doing the listening.
right. And
So,
so
yeah,
the empathy circle, once again,
yeah.
solves the problem.
Well, it's a minimum structure, that I
Mhm.
can think, that I see that sort of, it really, uh, I don't know, it fits a lot of the dynamics. You don't have to use the structure per se, but the underlying dynamic is you can apply, just sort of on the fly,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah, and as a facilitator, you're engaging in that form of you haven't have you called it meta empathy, or what's the word that you've used for it where you're noticing the level of empathy that's happening between the other participants?
Yeah, I just call that holistic
Okay,
empathy.
so that's where
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's where you're going with
Mm.
the holistic, where
Yeah.
it's the general feeling in the group, right? And so they're not noticing it because they're too caught up on what's going on inside their own minds. But you've been able to quiet that, and you have the skills and the training to be able to notice it and help them to navigate where they can't see where they're going. So I
Yeah,
think it's
so
beautiful.
the way I hold it is there's a relational empathy, the kind of the holistic empathy, and want to bring people into that sort of space, right? Let's say it's in a family, and maybe they're not ready for it, but so maybe you give empathy through empathic listening with the intention of bringing them into the mutuality of it, right? So it's like, I'll be willing to listen, and then now will you listen to me? Are you ready to listen and make it mutual? And I did that with my sister-in-law, who, when she was going into one of her manic phases. I did listening for her for like almost 2 hours or something. It's okay. I'm just going to listen. You need some emergency empathy. And then after that, I said, well, now I want you to be mutual. Do you want to listen to me? And she was in her manic phase. I'm not listening to you. So
Hmm.
I said, well, then we don't have a relationship. And let me know when you want to have a mutually empathic relationship. So I guess that's something I'm experimenting with too, is like, where do you draw the boundaries? If it's not
Right.
going to be a mutually empathic relationship, then I don't want to be, part of it.
Yeah, that's so tricky. Um, I just had a thought that I just need to say. This is completely off topic, but before I forget this, I am potentially going to seek IRB approval for some of the interviews that I've done with different people, including when I interviewed you.
Hmm.
And which at which point if they do give me permission to continue with it as like an official research project, because I've just been using it as pilot work to understand the constructs. But if I do get approval, then I'll need you to fill out a consent form
Hmm. That's
for
fine.
me to be able to use the
Mhm.
things that you've said. Um, Honestly, since we have all of our conversations recorded as well, I just think that it makes sense to even fold in the conversations that we've had into my research.
Great. Yeah. I'm glad
Okay,
for it to
so
be
I think I'm
used.
gonna, huh?
I'm glad for it to be used. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think that that's so beneficial to get it out into multiple channels. And so as I'm writing up the IRB application, I'm going to add this into it. Um, and since you have these all on YouTube, I could even point them to your YouTube channel and say you can view all of these. You can see that there was no adverse outcomes, and so retroactively, at times they are willing to give IRB approval. So
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, I just wanted to say that before I
Okay.
forgot. But that'll probably be starting next month. This month again, as you know,
Hmm.
it's crazy.
And what's the research going to be? What's the structure?
Well, it's qualitative, which means just analyzing interviews, analyzing conversations, and I could even, man, I mean, you have so much information and so many videos that could be analyzed. to pull out themes. Are you familiar with the process of coding qualitative interviews?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so basically, the easy way to understand it is hashtags, where you look at a sentence. And so we would have a transcript of all of our interactions, and we would have different hashtags. So one would be affective empathy, right? And so then every time that came up in any of our transcripts, we would put that hashtag like just for the entire phrase or the entire paragraph or something. And then you can search by hashtag, and then everything that has come up in all of the interviews, and I've interviewed several other people as well, anytime that comes up, then it would all be in one location.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it helps you to get a broader understanding of what everybody is saying about that specific topic. So I like it a lot. I find it really fulfilling. Um, Number one, I love I love hearing what people have to say. I love talking to people. And number two, I love going back over it and trying to pull more meaning out of it based on, yes, we had an interaction, but I didn't even see these themes that were coming up
Mm-hmm.
over and over and over again. So I think that could be a really interesting project.
Well, the Notebook LM is kind of the possibility of a framework for that because all of our discussions are in Notebook LM, and you can
Yeah. And it's so
search
good at
it
pulling out
and
the themes.
yeah, and it'll summarize. So there, I mean, the AI is, I mean, just that I can go in there and say, give me 50 quotes. Here's how I want it laid out. And I was going to get maybe 100 quotes. I'm just kind of doing the how to do the query, like what's the output that I want. And then the other is how to break that down because that's what I'm. So I guess that's actually the question is how, what's a good way for the presentation to address um, the cognitive affective model and map it onto the holistic model, I
Yeah.
guess
I
is
love
it.
that you can put in, so here's my model, here's this other model.
Hmm.
Where do they overlap?
Oh, I
I
didn't even think
use
about
that.
the try.
Uh, yeah, I
Uh,
mean, using AI for that. I mean,
hmm.
I put in a graphic that I had created, and I couldn't figure out what should go in one of the quadrants. I just didn't know what words to use for it. And it said, oh, well, this is how you could
Uh,
explain that what goes in that specific quadrant. So
mhm.
it's really good at helping you to think through things. Like it makes connections that we can't make. The one thing I've seen recently is, I don't know if you've seen this with AI, that sometimes it hallucinates.
Mhm.
And like, so I would randomly go back through those quotes and just search them
Mhm.
directly and see if it's making it up, because I've seen it do that before. Well, it will literally give me what looks like a real article with real authors on a real topic that they usually do write about, but it made up the whole thing. It's like they never actually wrote an article with that title
Mhm.
that
Oh
was
boy.
published in that journal.
Mhm.
And so it like gives me a quote and then it gives me a reference, but it totally made up the whole thing.
I wonder if you can use other AIs, get one AI to do it, and then have the other
Yeah,
AI double check it or
I think
double
that's
check it
exactly how
against a
you could do it.
couple. Hmm.
My husband was talking about that this morning. He works with AI all day, every
Oh,
day for
uh-huh.
his work. And he said that's one of the great things you can do is using multiple platforms to check the work that was done by the others. And you can even have it check itself. And it's really good at going back through and finding its own mistakes.
Yeah. And it's not only the hallucinations, it's also, I mean, trying to create something new like the holistic empathy model and then compare it doesn't know that model because it's not out there,
Mm-hmm.
so
Well, you
it's
could you give it everything that you've thought out about the model
yeah. I've been thinking
and
about that too, how
and
to do
just
that, like
see
say
how
here's
it
this model, yeah.
I wonder if it could even help you visualize it. I bet it could, like come up with a graphic that helps just describe this new,
Hmm.
like this novel model.
Yeah, yeah, and also that model I had of two people and then how are the feelings moving between them. I wonder if AI could create an interface for that, so you could change uh, like to be able to visually model like reactions versus empathy,
Mhm.
versus sensing into someone and emotional contagion versus reactions, that it could be visually presented and that you could somehow adjust the levers on it, like,
Oh, that would be
increase
so
this
cool.
and there's something like that I think would be really helpful because it's one of the problems with those explaining that is I haven't seen any good visualizations, to be able to visualize the concepts because it tends to be verbal. And if it's just verbal, you can you can, one person can, different people read different things into the verbal description. So,
Right, right. I agree with that. Um, would you mind sharing your screen and showing me those graphics again?
um, yeah, let's
I
see.
just remember really, really liking them.
I was using Mural.
I haven't used Mural before. Do you like it?
Yeah, I like the visualization and
Yeah, I like the way that looks. Is it a Google app or something or Microsoft?
it's its own company, but I'm not
Mhm.
really sure where. I'm not really sure where that
Oh, was
image.
that personal emotion diagram?
Oh, there it is. Let me put a bookmark there. So uh, yeah, if there was a program that could create this, like sharing feelings, empathy, the listener feels into we have the speaker, active listener. Speaker expresses depression. The listener can sense the depression. Um, and this is, however, they take it on. Oh, and this is so that you feel a sense, a little bit of the depression of the other person. So you just kind of hear them talk about the depression. You can see and sort of sense their depression
Mhm.
versus you become depressed and kind of become absorbed with your own feelings. You don't have the empathic space, which the gray is sort of modeling as that empathic space.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. So, whereas in the second model there, empathic space is not present because
Hmm.
you're just now feeling your depression.
Yeah. And
Okay.
it could be through emotional contagion, state matching, identification, some sort of reaction. Well, the emotional contagions was another model. So here's the depression, totally takes over both people. So that would be sort of emotional contagion, actually. And so here, the empathy, the active listener feels into the speaker's experience, reflects back their understanding. You're feeling depressed. The speaker continues sharing and the listeners stay present and reflects back their understanding. And here I was trying to model, and this is kind of fits in with cognitive empathy, right? So you're listening to the person, talking about depression, and you're sensing their depression, like, it, and but then that you create a sense of understanding, right? That you start creating a mental model of that person, and how you can infer things from that model. You can see the relationships, like they're depressed because, they just broke up with their relationship and they feel really lonely and they feel hopeless. And this ties into their childhood when they were abandoned or something.
Mhm.
And so you start creating that model of who that person is. And that's so the empathy in this case would be sort of the process of developing that understanding, which they say cognitive, some of the
And would you say that
definition.
that's where imaginative empathy comes into that situation? Because you're creating a mental map, but you're imagining part of what might have led them to that. Or do you see that as something
Hmm.
separate?
Yeah, I had sort of thought it separately, but
Just
um,
based on how we were discussing it earlier, it seems like that's
yeah,
the same thing. So that mental map is, in my understanding, where imaginative empathy comes into that scenario.
well, the imaginative empathy. I mean, there's imaginative empathy, imagining and empathy. There's kind of two main concepts for that. There's imagine self and imagine other. I don't know if you've seen those definitions. So here's this: you hear the situation, the speaker, their relationship broke up, they lost their job, and they have a situation. So I can imagine myself being them in their situation, and I kind of experience that. And it could be accurate or not accurate, right? Because you don't know, you don't have an error checking on that.
Mhm.
Or you can imagine them like, oh, I know who that person is. What's it like for them being in that situation? So sometimes that imaginative empathy is divided into those two categories. So yeah, it gets kind of subtle there.
Yeah.
Is that imaginative, or are you in the creating a mental map? Is that imaginative, or is it kind of putting a puzzle together?
Yeah,
That's a
I
little bit
wonder
of
if
a
it's a little bit
question.
of
I'm not
both
sure.
because
Yeah.
it seems like when you're putting together the pieces, there might be little pieces that are missing. And the way your brain makes the jump from this piece through this missing piece up to this one is you have to imagine something. So you create a story about what it probably was.
Yeah.
Because our brains are really good at making those kinds of like causal connections. And I mean, maybe we're wrong, but our that's kind of just how we're wired is we want to be able to make sense of things. And so we use the existing information. I like the idea of calling it like a puzzle. And you have, let's say it's a 100-piece puzzle, you might have 40 pieces, right, in different areas. And so some of it makes sense, and then other pieces, other parts of the puzzle don't make sense. So your brain fills in the gaps. So I think it's
Yeah.
kind of a combination of like creating a map and imagination that's happening.
Hmm. Yeah, it's yeah, yeah, I guess I have a lot of questions myself. Like I can see the issue, and um there does seem to be a distinct difference if I imagine myself in your situation. I mean, you can, with the mediation circle, right, where you role play different characters. So that's a really strong difference
Mhm.
there. What we're talking about is the subtle things that are going on in the mind. So yeah, I have real
So is
wonder
that where
about
you would
that.
separate it out between like the self-imaginative versus the other imaginative empathy? Like, because if you're trying to create a mental map of their inner world, you're not doing self-imaginative empathy, like putting yourself, like, how would I feel if I was experiencing that?
Right.
You're just
Uh,
trying to fill in the gaps of what you don't
you
understand.
might be little bits of both going on at the
Yeah,
same time.
probably.
What was the question you asked your children when they're about what does the other
Oh,
person
just basically,
feel?
how would you feel if that happened to you?
Okay,
So,
so you're asking imagine self
uh-huh,
then, right? So that's because you could say, how do you think that person feels when that happens to
right.
them versus
Right.
you?
And it
So
seems
those
like
are,
when I ask that, they don't quite understand. Like my
hmm
5-year-olds, they don't get that,
yeah,
but they can remember when they have experienced it before. And so that seems to be something that they can grasp more easily. I've
yeah.
got to go,
Okay,
unfortunately.
all right,
Um, I will see you in 2 weeks.
okay.
And it was I can't remember if you said how busy you are in the morning, but is there any chance we could move up our meeting to a little bit earlier? Because I didn't realize that my kids have a half day of school on the last day of school that day. So
hmm
if we could meet in the morning, that would be easier for me.
Yeah, Fridays don't work. Is there another day or
Um, no, there's
uh-huh.
really not. Um, can we just do a 30-minute meeting on that
Uh-huh.
day?
Okay.
Because I'll get them home from school, get them settled. I think they're getting out at noon. And kids are just so excited on the last day of school. And I don't want to say, okay, bye, I have to go to a meeting now.
I could
Like,
do an hour earlier, like next in 2 weeks. Is that like 11
um,
Pacific or?
let me find out exactly what time they get out of school because if they get out at noon, which is 11 your time, then that's when I need to be picking them up.
Oh,
So,
okay. hmm
I will get back to you on that because I actually don't know what time their school gets
Okay.
out. So, I'll let
Yeah.
you know. Let's plan on that same time, noon your time on the 23rd, unless I tell you differently.
And think of any ideas for how to uh, kind of map the cognitive, affective empathy onto like what would be a good thing to talk about? What's the most salient thing, to address first, you know?
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I'll definitely give that some thought.
okay.
All right.
All right,
And
very good.
I guess we won't see each other until after I've presented in Daryl Cameron's lab.
Oh, what are you presenting?
I I haven't created the presentation yet, but I'm going to incorporate some of my story of over empathizing after the death of my husband's friend and his family, and kind of just have it as a springboard for conversation about all of the different, because it's their lab is empathy and moral development, or is it
hmm
empathy and moral decision making? That's what it is. And so there's a lot of moral components that come into play with this specific scenario. So I want to have a discussion about that. And I also want to talk about some of these definition issues, and maybe some of the underlying philosophies of the way we study it in psychology, and then potentially bring in some of the other philosophers like Buber, um, Levinas, all of those. So it just depends on how much time we have. Because I like the idea of just getting into a really deep discussion about it rather than it being me presenting to them.
hmm
So yeah,
Well,
so I'm looking forward to it.
I did want to have the holistic model be stress tested by talking to people like Daryl and so forth. Say, hey, here's this model. What's your take on it? And what's your
Okay.
criticisms on it?
Yeah, so as I'm preparing it, I do want to look through what we have in the Defining Empathy website, and I pulled that up so that I am referring back to that this week as I'm preparing. And we'll see how much time we end up having. I know we'll have
hmm
an hour. So I'm gonna have to think through how to hit the highlights without getting too deep into discussion mode. Yeah, but I also don't have a lot of time to prepare for it because I'm creating a curriculum right now as
hmm
well. So anyway,
What's the curriculum?
it's for that sports camp, and
Oh, okay.
it's stressful, and that's the thing that we are having like some disagreements and stressful conversations about right now.
Use the
So
empathy circle.
I good idea. If only we had time, because
hmm
people are just they're in go mode and they're like, no,
Oh,
we don't have time to empathize. Let's just get this done. Okay. But yeah, so send your good vibes my way that we'll be able to
okay.
communicate well with each other.
Yeah, great. All right. See you then.
Okay.